This Week in Virology, the podcast about viruses, the kind that make you sick. From Microbe TV, this is TWiV. This Week in Virology, episode 1220, recorded on May 22nd, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about viruses. Joining me today from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
You're probably 30 miles from me, right?
Not very far, actually. You're in the incubator, and I'm just out here in Port Washington getting ready for thirsty Thursday, rainy, wet, cold, freezing sailboat racing.
Season is just starting, right?
It started last Thursday, and I missed it, so I could be there at Eloise Griffin's William and Mary graduation. But
well, that's a good reason.
Yeah, you gotta be a good dad, right?
What's on your tie today?
I think we're all these like little RNA segments or something, or
influenza virus.
It's influenza. Yeah, look at that.
Right. Influenza. We are all under the influenza.
I opened the door or the window and influenza. So, all right, I'm going to start with my quotation, but Vincent, I might get a little, riled up this week. So you jump in, you interrupt me at any point, okay?
Oh, if you get riled up, that's great. That's what I do usually.
Just let me run with it. All right, so I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. And that's Audre Lorde. I'll encourage people to look her up and learn a bit more about her. But I think there's a lot that we have to talk about that's been going on. And I think it's really important that we really are critical of the rhetoric so that our listeners see what's going on, see what devious stuff is occurring in the current attack on science. So
devious. I like that word, devious.
Yeah. It is devious, right? I mean, this is like scripted, gold standard, all this other stuff, transparency. And then we're going to ask, like, really? Is that what you're actually doing? So we're going to start with the Tuesday, May 20th. We had the article, An Evidence-Based Approach to COVID-19 Vaccination in the New England Journal of Medicine by Vinay Prasads and Martin McCary. It really, the title sounds so great, evidence-based approach. This is what we all want. And so this will give us some context for later when we discuss the official licensing of the Novavax COVID vaccine and some other things. But let's go into this because I have to say, I was listening to the VRBPAC meeting today, and I was getting a little frustrated, and maybe people will understand why as we move forward. But here we read. Moving forward, the FDA will adopt the following COVID-19 vaccination regulatory framework. On the basis of immunogenicity, proof that a vaccine can generate antibody titers in people, the FDA anticipates that it will be able to make favorable benefit-risk findings for adults over the age of 65 years and for all persons above the age of 6 months with one or more risk factors that put them at high risk for severe COVID-19 outcomes, as described by the CDC. We'll go into that a little more detail. So I just want to point out what are they doing here? So they're saying that the data we've talked about where you've got a vaccine and potentially you want to improve upon it. So hey, we made a little bit of a change. Maybe there's a new variant. We're going to do this. Well, look, we got higher antibodies, higher neutralizing antibodies. Is that going to be the data? And they're basically saying, like, only if you want that to be, are you ready for this? Licensed, approved. I'm not talking about recommendations yet, but licensed or approved. We're only going to give you that for 65 and up. We're only going to give that for people with risk factors. We're not going to actually allow for licensing for all healthy persons, those with no risk factors for severe COVID-19 between the ages of 6 months and 64 years. The FDA anticipates the need for randomized controlled trial data evaluating clinical outcomes before biological license applications can be granted. So let's pause there, Vincent.
Daniel, what if people someone's 40 and they want a vaccine? Why can't they get it? this way they're not going to be able to get it at the drugstore and their insurance would pay for it. I don't see why they have to do that. Take it away, whereas we've been using them, and then to take it away doesn't make any sense.
So this is the deviousness. This is the underhanded thing that's happening here with smiling, happy faces. Is they start off with figure 1 in this paper where they talk about vaccine recommendations according to age and risk, and they talk about recommendations, in Australia, Belgium, Canada, all the way, through the EU. But they're not talking about recommendations. What they're talking about here in this change is Vinay Prasad and Martin McCary are going to take away access. It's not a question about changing recommendations, which come from the CDC, but it's about these two fellows sort of like, taking over and saying, we're not even going to give you a license. If you actually dare to give this to people outside of our, ideas, then you're going to be having to use this off-label, unlicensed, with all the risks that are attendant of not having that protection. And as you bring up, they're going to limit people's access because now the insurance companies, those big insurance companies that I don't think most of us actually like, just by the way, now they can deny paying for this. And so if you want this in the United States, you got to ante up. So I just want to point out, this is not about changing guidance. This is about limiting access. This is taking away access. So, we go to, in this paper, they sort of lay out this, and I'm sort of doing the figures at a point. They say if you're 65 and up, if you're under 65, but you have one risk factor, we'll go into that. We're talking about a third of the U.S. population. And so instead of saying, fine, and then for the rest of you, it'll be out there, but you make your own decision. We're not talking about mandates. They're going to take away the license. Like, it's not going to be licensed for you if you're, let's say you're 54 and you wanted, no. If anyone gives it to you, they're like, unless the FDA is going to recommend, well, they say recommend, but basically they're going to say, you need to do post-marketing randomized placebo-controlled trials, or we're not going to give you a license. You're not going to be allowed to market this. You're not going to be allowed to have a licensed product in the U.S.
Why? What's the downside if people want it? Okay. I mean, the uptake has been low, as you have pointed out many times, right? But if there are many people writing to us who want this, and how many kids have died of COVID? Maybe some parents want to protect their kids. So this doesn't make any sense. It's just these two guys who, by the way, have no experience in infectious diseases or virology, have made this decision, which is typical of this administration, right?
Well, I think that's the part that's scary. It's traditionally what would happen is you get a group of experts together. You spent your years studying vaccines. You know about this. Maybe you're infectious disease. No, we're not going to ask the experts. We're not going to have them weigh in. We're not going to get the public to weigh in, kind of get a sense of what's going on here. Just these two fellows have now been given basically the power to restrict our access to products that most of us want. Most of us want access to. I mean, as we saw last year, not everyone gets this vaccine, but we want to know that if we want to get it, we don't have to go to, I don't know who we have to go to, and then go through this CDC list of underlying medical conditions and find something on the list and say I'm a little heavier than I'm supposed to be, or I'm physically inactive, or there's this smoking current informer. I don't know if I get to say my dad smoked a pipe and I smoked a pipe when I was in high school I went through a phase. Can I get the vaccine because of that? Or what are you supposed to divulge your medical, your private medical history when you go to the pharmacy? I mean, this is really crazy.
Daniel, the other thing that's annoying is that in the press, this would be done by a committee, right?
Normally it's a committee. Normally you don't have an oncologist or a surgeon. Academics, I don't even know how many patients they really see when you look at what they've been doing for a living. Vinay Prasad talks about, well, his patients, they benefit, they should get the vaccine, but other people's patients, he's not really sure that they should have access. I'm like, excuse me? So your patients can have this, but my patients can't? What about all these people with long COVID and they really want that protection? I don't see a history of long COVID or chronic fatigue or a lot of these other things in the list. Really horrible. So I want to point that out. I'm going to sort of, I'm going to leave in a link to a YouTube where these two guys are sitting around chatting, about their decision, and they're really just sort of. It's interesting. The FDA has turned from sort of an information disseminating into sort of like a PR thing. You watch these two, and you're like, oh my gosh, this scripted PR piece. No, it's not a discussion. It's like, the two of them sort of selling their stuff. So there's an article on this topic, FDA poised to restrict access to COVID vaccines by Christina Jewett and Apoorva Mandavili. And I'll read a couple of the quotations. First, they've got this Dr. Daniel Griffin, a physician in New York. He claims to have treated thousands of COVID patients. And he says, I think that changes like this will lead to more unnecessary deaths. What they're really doing is they're very slowly reducing vaccination in the country. This doesn't preserve people's choice to get vaccinated, says Dr. Denise Jameson, Vice President for Medical Affairs at the University of Iowa and advisor to the CDC. In this article is something that will surprise most readers and will need to be ignored by those who are still sticking to the line that COVID is not a big deal in kids. I just want to point out in this calendar year where they ended in August, the CDC reported, you ready for this, 150 additional pediatric deaths due to COVID. That's during Omicron. That's when, quote unquote, it's mild. I just want to remind people, we've had over 1,000 deaths in children from COVID. And we keep adding to that number. We see thousands of hospitalizations. In children, we see tens of thousands of hospitalization in adults. We see all these people still developing long COVID. These are all things that vaccination can prevent. And so I just want people to realize that here we are seeing the happy, smiling faces as they take away our access. And I'm gonna circle back to this when we talk a little bit about the VRBPAC meeting and the Novavax approval and kind of the recommendations going forward. So we're going to return to this, but before we take a brief pause and talk about HPV and mpox, comments, Vincent?
These vaccines were licensed for 12 and up, right? There's no scientific reason to take that license away at this time. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what they're talking about here. They're not talking about, and I think it's really important, they're not talking about changing recommendations. They're talking about removing access.
Yeah, and the previous decision was made by a committee, and these guys don't agree with it. So that's it, because I'm sure if 12 people looked at this, we would have a different outcome, because they are experts like Paul Offit who, well.
Yeah. Well, we'll circle back to that. But okay, so we'll take a little break. Everyone take a deep breath. Maybe a little bit of good news, I'm going to say. HPV vaccine, and this was a headline in the Daily Nation. We can't remain indifferent to suffering. Catholic Church now champions HPV vaccination. So Father Charles Chalufa, director of the Africa Health and Economic Transformation Initiative, explained the urgency driving this new mission. About 3,500 women die annually from cervical cancer in Kenya alone, with 119,000 cases across Africa. 50% of healthcare facilities in Kenya are faith-based. We agreed to go all out to put into action the screening, vaccination, and treatment so that our women, mothers, and girls are safe. So this is a vaccination that prevents cancer. It's a cancer prevention vaccination. If you read this article, I'll leave in a link, they really talk about the silliness around you get this vaccine and suddenly you're going to become horribly promiscuous and sinful in the eyes of the Lord. None of that is true. This is about moving past that mythology, that ignorance, and really protecting the women, mothers, girls.
Isn't it most important to save lives?
That's really what this change is about.
And so the people who say this business of promiscuity, they're really just anti-vax. That's an excuse.
It really, as we've realized, it's an excuse. There's no evidence to support, that if you got, the HPV vaccination, suddenly you change your moral code. Young men and women are not limiting their amount of sex based upon a concern that they might, when they grow to be adults, have cervical cancer. Right?
Hey, I got the HPV vaccine. Let's go have sex.
It doesn't happen. It was a silly anti-science, anti-vaccine excuse. And so I'm really glad that the Catholic Church has come around here. So, all right, mpox, just to briefly mention the article, Air and Surface Sampling for Clade 1b Monkeypox Virus in United Kingdom Hospitals 2024 to 2025, published in Eurosurveillance. So to understand if the immediate environment of patients with Clade 1b mpox can become contaminated with the monkeypox virus, these authors investigated whether this virus can be detected in environmental samples, air samples, collected from 7 patients' rooms or anterooms. They do this environmental sampling, and they found the virus in 73% of surface samples, 7% of air samples, as well as replication competent, they say live virus, in 19% of surface samples that underwent viral isolation. And what they do is they inoculate this onto these monolayers of the Vero E6 cells, and then they incubate them. So, all right. So be careful when you're taking care of those folks. And bird flu, we're not hearing much about bird flu, are we? But I'm going to give you an update anyway. So 13,025 wild bird detections as of May 14th. I'll link into the full report. 51 jurisdictions with bird flu in the wild birds. 171,554,878 poultry affected as of the 20th of May. 51 jurisdictions with outbreaks in poultry, matching the wild birds there. Over 1,000, so 1,065 dairy herds affected, 17 states with outbreaks in dairy cows. So I just want to point out, you're not hearing about this, but oh my gosh, this is just raging ahead. One of my friends was asking when we would all die of bird flu. I would tell him we wouldn't know until after the fact with the current dissemination of information. But okay.
I'll tell you afterwards.
Exactly. And then I won't even allow you to be told. So, all right, measles. What's going on with measles? We don't hear about measles anymore. It must all be over. Wait a second here. As of May 15th, we are over 1,024 confirmed measles cases reported by 31 jurisdictions. 13% of the cases have been hospitalized, and that's not for quarantine. That's because these folks are sick. Got a nice graph of going on over time. Things are not going well up in Canada. They're approaching 2,000. So they're a little bit behind, so they may actually even be there. But so far, as of May 3rd, they're up to 1,846 measles cases.
Daniel. Daniel, this epi curve looks like it's coming down now. And, measles typically ends in May. So do you think that's what's happening here?
No, I think part of it is a reporting, right? It's going to, because we keep adding, right? So, For instance, in Canada, they had 346 new cases just in that report. We had more cases, in this recent, so. We'll keep tracking it. I think there's always that, that lagging, right? Like, you've only got so many cases that have come in that last, but then as time goes by, they get, compiled. So we'll see. I would love if we were coming off this, but just the fact that we're seeing, more cases pop up in different areas, we're seeing it ending up in metro areas. We're below this critical vaccination threshold. I'm not optimistic. I would like to be optimistic. And so we'll leave in our table to vaccine recommendations and all the vaccine safety information there. Flu, sort of have flu on the back burner, hopefully for a little bit. But just to let people know, this was a particularly bad flu year. Vaccination rates were down, and everyone who sort of ignores, how severe flu can be. I mentioned that 150 number for COVID deaths, pediatric. We actually, for pediatric and flu deaths, that number is up to 227 deaths just this season. So this is little kids dying of the flu. And remember, we won't get our full tally until the fall. And as we always point out repeatedly, these kids are mostly unvaccinated. So this is a vaccine preventable outcome. All right, RSV, we're nice quiet there for a while, but COVID, big thing I want to follow here is our multicolored wastewater trend. Look at that. We actually have one part of the country getting into the very low. So that's here.
Going down. It's going down. And look at that. Good.
I think that's northeast, right? So we're really getting into very low. Everyone else is in the low. We've got a nice downtrend. The challenge we're going to run into is are we going to stick with this sort of biphasic pattern that we've been seeing for the last few years with COVID? All right, I haven't talked about this in a while, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the variants because this is going to come up as we get into vaccine recommendations. But you'd see across the country, like the vast majority is this LP 8.1, right? And so this is in the JN1 lineage. And I leave in a link to this nextstrain.org site where you can actually see, where does this come in? So you've got Omicron and then it branches off, and they've got the BA2 and that branches off, and you see XBB up there, and then you see the JN1 lineage. And so this is in the JN1 lineage. So that's mostly of what we're seeing now is JN1 lineage viruses since about a year or so ago. And I even have kind of a zoom in our show notes. But you can go to that site. You can look and see. Because this is what's going to come up. We're going to talk about the VRBPAC meeting where they're talking about is JN1 just fine? Can we use like the KP or do we need like a new LP8 vaccine? So the FDA advisors discussed vaccine recommendations today. I don't know what everyone else was doing this Thursday, but I was sort of lucky in some sense. Yesterday, one of my pipes burst, right? So I had to go into work early so that I could be home waiting for the plumber and, oh my gosh, and listening to the VRBPAC meeting. So mixed whether you come, but I'll leave in a link to a writer's article to actually you can watch the YouTube. I think it's recorded now. But so in the brief of the article, the brief of for this meeting, they're really talking about the question that they're going to vote on, which is for the 2025-2026 formula of COVID-19 vaccines in the U.S., does the committee recommend a monovalent JN1 lineage vaccine composition? Yes or no? And what they're talking about is this continuing antigenic drift between JN1 and KP2, and current circulating subvariants. And they actually had all the companies there. They had Pfizer, they had Moderna, they had Novavax, showing different data. A lot of it was mouse data, right? Because they're taking, these new antigens and showing comparative neutralizing antibody stuff. So a discussion that within the JN1 lineage, the neutralizing data supports the selection of LP8 as the best antigen. But really, as a lot of the people said, the current vaccines really seem just fine with really only a slight or incremental advantage to an update. And not everyone thought we needed an update. So really similar to WHO recs, where the WHO recs were basically current monovalent JN1 or KP2 are just fine. But if you want to do LP 8.1, that's fine also. One of the things, and this is when I got really frustrated, right? So they've got a FDA person there because this is VRBPAC, this is the advisory committee, and they said, if we just stick with the old, fine, but if we say, we think you should go from the JN1 or the KP2, and this year, and those are licensed, and this year we suggest a monovalent LP 8.1. Are you going to then limit access? Are you going to say, ooh, that's too much of a change in those few amino acids that we now are going to restrict that to people 65 and over? I mean, that's what the New England Journal of Medicine article, that's what Vinay Prasad is telling us. And he wouldn't answer. He's like, I can't comment. I can't comment on ongoing discussions. And so I was very frustrated because they're sitting there saying, we're not even sure that really is that important to, shift to the LP 8.1. The person who's leading the group is like, really our sort of charters, we only really change if we think if it's compelling. We don't just do if it's sort of maybe. But the whole time behind the scenes, I'm thinking, if you guys change from the current one, which looks like it's going to be just fine, you're going to end up in the crosshairs, and you may end up with products that they do not allow you to use
That's right.
outside of these certain groups.
Yeah. So basically, this discussion would only apply to 65 and over, or mostly, except if you have a comorbidity, right?
Well, if they leave it the same, Moderna and Pfizer are just fine. But if they
But it's still 65 and over, though.
Well, so they're licensed right now for everyone. So the Moderna's licensed,
Yeah.
the Pfizer's licensed, the current vaccines are fully licensed, and they would just go to, then there might be guidance from CDC, but they might say, you know what,
Well, we just said that Macari and whatever Prasads said they're going to limit it. So,
but they can't limit. They can't. I don't know if they. Well, I wonder about. Can they take away license? Like right now, they said to Novavax, which we'll get into, you're going to be only licensed for a certain zone, but these are already licensed. So are they going to, if Moderna and Pfizer change their product, then it's going to have to go through this. Then the FDA can potentially say, yeah, we'll license your LP8, but we're only going to license it in 65 and over and people with a comorbidity. Otherwise, if you give this quote unquote new product, that's the challenge. That's what I'm worried about here.
Yeah. But as with respect to our previous discussion, it seems that they already are limiting it to 65 and over, no matter what. Even if you leave the vaccine composition the same, they're still going to limit it. So they're withdrawing some of the license, basically.
Yeah, I mean that seems where they're headed. So, we'll do the Novavax, right, and then we'll kind of spin back to this. So Novavax, right, just got licensed, right? So it's now fully approved. It's licensed. This is the traditional protein-based adjuvanted vaccine. I think that this is great news, right? I think the approved Novavax vaccine is great news. There was a lot of discussion today about how a lot of people want options. Not everyone wants an mRNA vaccine, right? So it might be a choice issue. They want more traditional vaccine, something that, we've been using for like shingles vaccine, et cetera. Other people, right, every time they get an mRNA vaccine, they're down for the count for a day or two, a lot of reactogenicity. Some people, a lot of reactogenicity. So people want, for different reasons, to have a choice, right? But here's the licensure. It's not just go ahead, as we would normally say, licensed, approved, and then the CDC will make recommendations on who should get it. Under this license, you are authorized to manufacture the product COVID-19 vaccine adjuvanted, which is indicated for active immunization to prevent coronavirus disease, COVID-19, caused by SARS-CoV-2 in adults 65 years and older. Additionally, COVID-19 vaccine adjuvanted is indicated for individuals 12 through 64 who have at least one underlying condition that puts them at high risk for severe outcomes from COVID-19. We are deferring your submission for pediatric studies for ages birth to less than 12 years for this application because this product is ready for approval for use in adults and the pediatric studies have not been completed, and they list some of the studies. So this is like sort of the first blow. So here they're actually going ahead and they're approving Novavax, but they're not approving it or licensing it for, let's say, you're 64 years old and you had long COVID, or for some other reason you want access to this vaccine because you don't want to go with an mRNA vaccine.
So long COVID, yeah, that's a good point. Long COVID is higher in young people who can't get the vaccine, but we already know that the vaccine decreases the incidence of long COVID, right?
We have a number of studies that show that.
So they're just ignoring that.
I think that's a big thing. A lot of people, even myself included, I try to keep that BMI where it should be. I exercise on a regular basis. I mean, I don't think if I get COVID that my chance is significant that I'm going to end up dying. But I have seen a lot of folks, and I'll leave in a link later to Physics Girl, people who are young and healthy and really are debilitated by long COVID. And that number is much higher than the number of people that are dying. And this just completely, removes licensing for people that might be making the decision for that reason.
Yeah.
So it seems to be, unless you're going to die, too bad.
It seems to me that they don't actually believe in long COVID then.
Well, we know that these two have actually made comments before that they feel like it's a waste of time to study long COVID and come up with therapies. I mean, that's just they've shared, so that's what's out there. So now a number of articles, lots of comments about this Novavax approval, and we read in the Associated Press, which I think they're trying to get rid of. Novavax makes the nation's only traditional protein-based coronavirus vaccine. And until now, it's had emergency use for anyone in age 12 and over. Vaccines made by Novavax's competitors already are fully licensed for use in anyone 12 and older and are authorized for use in children as young as 6 months. And then they talk about the Novavax decision suggests the Trump administration may already have given us some sort of a hint of how they're going to proceed going forward. I mean, as I think we've already pointed out, Vincent, the first concerning aspect of this approval and this recent FDA move is it's really something of a power grab by the FDA that ultimately is restricting access to our vaccines. I mean, the FDA is really supposed to be tasked with approving products, and then it goes to committees and there's advisory groups, and really the CDC then gives us guidance and recommendations, not mandates. Remember, the CDC is not a police organization. And then ultimately you have these licensed available vaccines, you have guidance and recommendations, and then patients and doctors have the freedom to make individual choices. They talk all about freedom, but what we have here is they're actually taking away our choice, no public comments, no group of experts, just Vinay Prasad and Martin Makary, a cancer doctor and a surgeon who are suddenly so expert in vaccines that they're going to make the decision for all of us. Am I missing something, Vincent?
You got it. It hits the nail right on the head. But people just see MD, and they think they know everything, right?
Yep, I think
Daniel,
and that's a concern. Yeah.
Do you know everything about cancer, Daniel?
No, and I mean I think that's the crazy thing. What Vinay Prasad think if I started like making recommendations and restricting access to those chemo drugs because they are so toxic, Vincent? I really think he should be allowed to give those to people. I mean, come on, that's the absurdity here. Or what would Dr. Makary think if I started just doing some surgery? Because I read a few like social media posts or something.
Yeah, that's all you need to do, and then you're an expert.
Yeah, did my own research on that iPhone, All right, and we've got a headline: HHS to stop recommending COVID shots for children, pregnant women. This is the Wall Street Journal reports. This appeared in Writers. So we've got Writers, Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal, I think, is behind a paywall. Writers, I'll leave access to both. So the CDC currently recommends that everyone 6 months and older, including pregnant women, receive COVID vaccines. Kennedy has long been a foe of the COVID vaccines. And he actually, I just want people to remember this, he petitioned the FDA in 2021 to revoke their emergency use authorizations. Separate from my role as a regulator, I am not encouraging or insisting young, healthy children to get a COVID shot unless there is new evidence that emerges that suggests there's a clear benefit, FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary said Thursday. And as HHS Secretary, Kennedy has the legal power to change the CDC's vaccine recommendations. I want to point that out. It is an incredibly powerful position that we've given Kennedy. Now, fewer people are getting COVID shots in the early days of the pandemic. As of April, about 13% of children, 14% of pregnant women have received the most recent COVID shot. It's not clear if the department is planning to remove the recommendation entirely for those groups or just suggest that patients talk with their doctors about risks and benefits. We also heard that the FDA is telling Pfizer and Moderna to expand the warning labels on their COVID vaccines about the risk of a possible heart injury side effect linked to the mRNA shots, primarily in teen boys and young men. And they cite findings from a study published last year and, quote unquote, new agency data. So the rate of myocarditis and pericarditis was around 8 cases per million doses for children and adults under 65. The FDA says the new warnings ordered by the FDA add that the highest estimated incidence was in males 16 to 25 years of age, with a rate of 38 cases per million. So 3.8 per 100,000. The Centers for Disease Control has previously described rates of myocarditis and pericarditis as rare after COVID-19 vaccination. Now, CDC officials told the agency's advisors last month that acute myocarditis tends to resolve quickly after vaccination, and no increased risk has been seen in data from recent seasons in people 12 to 39 years of age. So it's actually interesting. Like, the most current data is actually saying that this issue tends to be decreased as of late, but yet we're seeing this. Now you've got to add this sort of highlighted thing. But it appears you can have things both ways, right? These vaccines are horrible, but at the same time, the U.S. House panel is seeking information from Pfizer over alleged COVID vaccine delay to influence the election. So now they're upset that they didn't get this out soon enough, but now they're upset that it's even out there at all. Okay. So our listeners may remember the robust data we discussed on the new Moderna combo flu COVID-19 vaccine shot. Remember all that really great data we had there? Well, we just heard that Moderna pulls licensing submission for combo flu COVID-19 vaccine. And why is that? Because right now you need this extra placebo saline injection efficacy data. So you can't just show that, wow, that surrogate endpoint, those really high antibodies that has correlated. That's a great correlate of protection. Nope, that's not enough. You're going to have to do this trial, and hopefully we'll get that efficacy data sometime this summer. All right. So I am going to move ahead. COVID early viral phase. Not a lot of changes there. COVID early inflammatory phase. Well, remember we talked about these folks. They end up in the hospital, and all these people get steroids. All these people get antibiotics. Well, steroids we've talked about. The right patient, the right dose. This is after the first week. Oxygen saturation is less than 94%. This is during that inflammatory period. But how much? How much is enough? So we have the clinical impact of prolonged steroid therapy in severe COVID-19 patients, a retrospective cohort study with propensity score matching, published in BMC Pulmonary Medicine. I'm not sure some of those folks we've mentioned understand the concept of propensity score matching, where you try to match, but here's where you try to match the people in the study. And this is a retrospective single-centered cohort study with propensity score matching, where they're going to compare clinical outcomes to people that get less than 10 days to people that get more than 10 days of steroids. If you look at, so PT is going to be prolonged, and EW is going to be early withdrawal, right? So prolonged, 5.9, early withdrawal, 10.3 for the 28-day mortality. We see overlapping confidence. We go to our 60-day mortality. The prolonged therapy, the mortality now is at 14.7. The early withdrawal is 11.8. So we follow these folks out to 60 days. We're actually seeing we're seeing a higher, but again, just trending, wide confidence intervals. Now, the prolonged therapy prolonged steroid therapy group, had significantly longer durations of oxygen support. Here we're seeing statistically significant difference, about an extra 4.5 days. Longer hospitalizations, about an extra 6 days in the hospital, more time in the ICU, extra like 4 days in the ICU. So longer periods of steroids were statistically significant for more oxygen support, more hospitalization, and more ICU stay. So sort of suggesting trying to limit those steroids. But again, there was a difference between these patients. This is retrospective. Why was the decision made to keep some people on longer than others? So certainly a lot of qualifications and challenges here. All right. What about giving all them people with viruses antibiotics? So this falls into that avoiding harmful and useless stuff. We have the article Antibiotic Treatment in Patients Hospitalized for Non-Severe COVID-19, published in JAMA Network Open. These are results of a retrospective cohort study that used a target trial emulation design. Participants were adults, immunocompetent, admitted to general care for COVID-19, acute care hospitals that contribute data to the Premier Healthcare Database. we've got 520,405 patients with COVID-19. A total of 160,482 were treated with a community-acquired antibiotic regimen on day one of admission. The primary outcome was a composite measure of deterioration in hospital mortality. So the primary composite outcome was higher in the community-acquired pneumonia-treated group, 20.8%, compared with the unexposed no antibiotic group, 18.4%. So not huge, but I will say patients who received the antibiotics had higher odds of poor clinical outcomes. Odds ratio 1.03, so a little bit going in the wrong direction. And then we see inverse probability treatment, odds ratio 1.03, and standardized mortality ratio, weighted odds ratio of 1.10. And that was statistically significant. So moving in the wrong direction and about a 10% increase in mortality to using antibiotics for these folks with a viral illness.
We've seen similar results in other studies that you've talked about, Danny.
We've really built on this. This just people wanting to give antibiotics and somehow feeling like they're being conservative or cautious or, yeah. So not great, actually, as we're seeing here, to give antibiotics to someone with a serious viral illness. All right. And long COVID, we've got a couple things here. Really one study, and I'm going to leave in two studies I'll leave in a link. The first is the article, Self-Reported Health, Neuropsychological Tests and Biomarkers in Fully Recovered COVID-19 Patients versus Patients with Post-COVID Cognitive Symptoms, a pilot study published in PLOS One. So the objective of this pilot study was to compare two groups of lab-confirmed post-COVID patients with or without cognitive symptoms on measures of cognitive and psychological functioning, self-reported perceptions of functional status, quality of life, and biomarkers of stress, inflammation, and neuroplasticity. Using a case-controlled design, 17 participants were recruited from a healthcare system in Western Michigan in 2022 to 2024. All participants were aged 25 to 65 and had a positive PCR confirming COVID-19 infection. 10 participants reported cognitive symptoms. This is the long COVID group. 7 were fully recovered with reported no residual symptoms. Those are the controls. And all these folks underwent an interview on their self-rated health and quality of life, a battery of neurocognitive tests, and a blood draw for biomarker analysis. Now, they found that long COVID folks scored significantly lower on letter fluency. Serum levels of nerve growth factor, a biomarker of brain plasticity, were significantly lower in the long COVID group, which was significantly more likely than controls to have serum levels of IL-10 greater or equal to the median. Biomarker analysis suggests possible prolonged inflammatory processes in long COVID patients compared to the fully recovered patients. And so they conclude with results of decreased neuroplastic functioning give credence to patients' reports of post-COVID changes in brain function. So throw this in more objective evidence that something's really going on here. The article, Vortoxitine for cognitive impairment in major depressive disorder during post-COVID syndrome, real-world evidence published in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry. So these are results of a prospective, open-label, comparative effectiveness study in individuals with new-onset major depressive disorder as a post-COVID syndrome outcome. So the participants were assigned to receive this Vortoxitine, escitalopram, or sertraline, right? So you're going to get basically these different medications, and they're going to get them over 8 weeks. You're going to compare these different medications, and then the primary and secondary outcomes were changes from baseline to endpoint in a couple of these tests. So a digital symbol substitution test, a Montgomery-Asberg Depression Rating Scale, or patient-reported outcome measurement information system fatigue short form 7A, the PROMIS 7A. They're going to collect the data. You're going to end up with 70 in one group, 36 in another group, and 34 in the last group. And what they actually going to tell us, and so there's no like placebo, it's just really compare this drug to other drugs. Participants assigned to the Vortoxitine, which is Trintellix, that's a lot easier to say, exhibited significant changes in the DSST scores from baseline to endpoint compared to escitalopram or sertraline. Participants in the Vortoxitine treatment group reported significantly greater changes in total MADRS scores from baseline to endpoint compared to the other drugs. So we're really here comparing SSRIs, so serotonin reuptake inhibitors, to this serotonin modulator stimulator class of drug, which is a SMS. So SSRIs compared to SMS, and so maybe the SMS had a little bit of a trend towards more efficacy here. And this is like a happy conclusion, I guess, to this episode. I'm going to share a link to a YouTube update on the progress that Diana Cowan, physics girl, has made in her battle with long COVID. And so, no spoilers, but I'm leaving it there, and I'm going to suggest people watch and see kind of what she's been through and what a lot of other folks have been through with long COVID, and maybe a little bit of optimism. Maybe there's some improvement for those that click and watch that. All right, as we've been saying for over 5 years, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Encourage everyone to pause the recording right here. Go to parasites.borders.com and click on the donate button. Every small amount helps. May, June, and July, we're doing our Foundation International Medical Relief of Children fundraiser. Again, doubling your donations and hopefully sending a maximum donation of $20,000 to help support their work around the world.
It's time for your questions for Daniel. You can send yours to daniel@microbe.tv. Mark writes, "This is my first email since meeting you both at TWiV 1000. Keep on going. I listen to Clinical Update every Saturday walking my dogs. Background, married couple. He was born in 58. She's 62. Both current on vaccines for flu, RSV, SARS-CoV-2, shingles, other common vaccines. They have travel planned in June to the UK, Norway, and Iceland. CDC travel guidelines recommend full vaccination for measles. Both received MMR for travel in 2019. Neither recalls if they were vaccinated for measles as children. Brothers, cousins, don't know. Sadly, all parents deceased. Question, given they received an MMR vaccination in 2019, are they safe or do they need another one?"
Oh, this is a good one. So, people can look at our chart and try to figure this out. So the magic year was 57, right? If you're born before 57, we assume you've got, immunity from having been infected. But born in 58, born in 62. So now you move into the vaccination era. But this is the early period, right? This is that period when we still were using some of the inactivated ones. So we're not really sure, when you tell me this story, like what you got. So we do know that in 2019, you got one MMR, but we don't know if you got a second of the MMR. Now, in general, I think the recommendation is if you don't know what happened, you get that MMR booster, and we sort of consider it a done day. And I think that's reasonable. There isn't a horrible downside if you say, I'm going to get a second one so I know I've got my 2 MMR shots. But let me see. Let's go back to our chart and see what our chart from NYP tells us what to do. So let's see. So here they say vaccinated between here and here, get 1 dose of MMR. And then they have this other one vaccinated between 68 and 89. Then you might consider the second. So yeah, I think get 1 dose of MMR is right in line with the guidance. And if you got a second one, that is not a problem either.
Kang writes, "Had a delightful dinner with Vincent, Christina, and you at the Greek Islands restaurant when you were in Chicago, and I'm still delighted by the information I get from clinical updates. Question about MMR vaccine. I was born before 57, but my PCP checked my titers. Measles and rubella titers are high. No antibodies for mumps. What are your recommendations for a booster?"
All right, Kang. Yes, I remember that was actually fun. That was a good restaurant. So the recommendation is that if you've gone ahead, if you've gone ahead and gotten the 2 vaccines, right, then we'd say, okay, that's fine. Then you're protected. But this is a little different, right? So you're born before 57. So I'm not seeing, that you would have been vaccinated. So you might be in that weird little world where, you might want to go ahead and get the MMR times 2 to actually get that mumps protection.
Rich writes, "Can you review the criteria for selection of testing protocols with various respiratory infections in a primary care setting? It can be confusing in the case of a respiratory infection owing to similarities of symptoms and the need to self-advocate for an early evidence-based therapy."
Yeah, so this is great, and this is really challenging, and really a lot of this it's a financial limitation, right? Because I remember there was that article where the person was bemoaning, wanting to return to the days when we could just say it's just a virus, but I don't like those days. I like when I can tell a patient this is RSV, this is influenza, this is COVID, this is human metapneumovirus, right? But people didn't even know what that was. Certainly, it can be hard to sell people on like making a vaccine for human metapneumovirus when they've never even heard of it. There's also certain enterorhinoviruses, but a lot of what drives us is really this question of will it impact management, unfortunately, because I think it would certainly inform and educate. It certainly would help us in that discussion about not wanting to do antibiotics. So from a societal point of view, doing more of these testing might make sense. But currently, the way we approach this is we ask if it's going to make a difference. So, person is over 65, for instance. Sometimes we can use a little bit, based upon what's prevalent at the time. Are we in the height of RSV? Are we in the height of influenza season? At this point, flu activity is incredibly low. RSV activity is low. In a lot of places, COVID is low. So we may still just check ones where we can make a difference. So really, that's going to be your guidance, is really looking at the situation. Person says, hey, I'm living with someone who's immunocompromised. Again, you may want to know if it's one of the ones where you're going to have evidence-based interventions. But there's really a lot here that can, guide you to initiate early evidence-based therapy. Also a lot here that can keep that person from going down the street and getting unnecessary antibiotics.
And Robert writes, I'd like to provide some feedback on a recent TWiV episode. First, a bit about my background. I received a PhD in molecular and cell biology from the University of Washington, have worked in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry for over 24 years. I currently work at a nonprofit focused on drug and vaccine development for infectious diseases in low and middle income countries. I participated in efforts to develop two recombinant protein subunit SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, Corbavax and Indavac, for which over 100 million doses were deployed during the pandemic in India and Indonesia. In short, I am like you, a scientist with expertise in virology and vaccines. In your recent coverage of the absurd HHS plan, Generation Gold Standard, to develop inactivated vaccines using beta-propiolactone inactivation, you criticized this approach because the Chinese had already tried this with SARS-CoV-2 and it was unsuccessful. First, my commentary on the science behind this. I completely agree the data with Sinovac's BPL-inactivated coronavac SARS-CoV-2 vaccine indicates that overall it was less effective than mRNA vaccines at providing protection from severe disease. Furthermore, I share your dismay that this plan will be a huge waste of taxpayer money and risks damaging the credibility of vaccine development in general. However, I'd like to encourage you to avoid monolithic and potentially inflammatory statements about what the Chinese have done, as these may reinforce racist stereotypes. Perhaps I'm being hypersensitive as a fourth-generation Chinese American, but I believe statements like this risk insinuating that this approach, generating vaccines via BPL inactivation, is inherently flawed because of Chinese inferiority. As you are well aware, there has already been a huge amount of unwarranted and racist criticism of Chinese scientists and Chinese people in general during the pandemic. Instead, I would encourage you to be more specific and racially, nationally neutral. For example, simply stating that the BPL approach was unsuccessful with widely deployed vaccines such as coronavac. It's unnecessary to bring in race and nationality. I will also point out that another BPL inactivated vaccine, Covaxin, was produced by the Indian company Bharat Biotech. In other words, it was not only a Chinese company that developed a BPL inactivated SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, which was found to be less effective than mRNA vaccines. We should use objective data to make our arguments and need to be vigilant about invoking racist tropes. I remain a supporter of and donor to both Microbe TV and Parasites Without Borders. Please keep up the good work.
Best regards, Robert. Yeah, Robert, thank you. Actually, I'm glad that we got a chance to read that. And I will be careful. It certainly wasn't meant that way. As this was a criticism, it was more of the Chinese tried that. But yeah, this is very, very good that you write this in, because I think we do have to be sensitive, because a lot of people will use this as a suggestion that there's some inferiority to the Chinese, which there certainly isn't. And so, I just want to point out that it was going back to old technology, and I will certainly be more careful in the future. But yeah, thank you for bringing this up.
I think he's spot on. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember the name of the vaccine, so...
Yeah.
But we
in the
should have
future,
just
we
said,
should just say Sinovac.
yeah, we should have just said VPL inactivated vaccines don't really work.
Yeah.
Right? But even formalin inactivated are not very good. So thank you, Robert. Really appreciate that. That's TWiV, Weekly Clinical Update with Dr. Daniel Griffin. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you. And everyone, be safe.